what if I told you that some abandoned churches don't just sit empty, they hold on to something that lingers long after the last sermon, long after the congregation is gone, and long after the doors were locked for the final time. These aren't just ruins, they're places locals avoid, explorers fear, and historians struggle to explain. St. Mary's Church, now this is in Clopel Hill, England, and this is the desecrated parish. Now, hidden on a very lonely hill in Bedfordshire, the 14th century St. Mary's Church was abandoned in 1848, and it quickly fell into ruin. But its real story begins in 1963, when grave robbers broke into the churchyard and actually dug up a coffin, placing human bones inside the church in what appeared to be an occult ritual. Now, police described it as one of the worst cases of cemetery desecration the region had ever seen, and it honestly did not stop there. More graves were violated in 1969 and again in 1975, feeding all these rumors that the ruins were being used for satanic gatherings. Now, since then, locals have reported strange lights flickering around the church tower, hooded figures standing amongst the tombstones, and a very eerie coldness that kind of hangs over the site, even in the summer. I mean, it's one of the few abandoned churches in England where villagers openly warn visitors just not to go there after dark, because whatever moved in after the parish moved out, well, it still hasn't left. St. George's Church, this is in Lakova in the Czech Republic. Now, this is the ghost congregation. Deep in this very tiny village of Lakova stands a 14th century church, and it has a very tragic history. In 1968, during a funeral service, the roof just suddenly collapsed. I mean, it was out of nowhere. Now, luckily, taking the lives of no one, but terrifying the congregation enough that they actually just never returned ever. Now, for decades, the church just rotted, stripped of its furniture, and vandalized beyond recognition. But then in 2012, artist Jacob Hadrava installed more than 30 life-size plaster ghosts seated in the pews, which is really creepy when you think about it. Hooded figures draped in white cloth, and it's meant to represent the kind of Sudeten German parishioners expelled from the region after World War II. Now, since then, visitors swear that the statues actually shift. Sometimes they say they lean, and some people even say they tilt their heads between visits. Now, some claim they hear faint murmuring or even soft footsteps echoing behind them, even though the church is completely empty. Now, one tourist passed out after thinking one of the ghostly figures actually breathed on him. Now, whether it's just, the uncanny sculptures or the weight of the church's history, literally almost everyone who enters this church, they say the exact same thing. This place, it feels occupied. St. Antienne Church in France. Now, this is the church that refused to just go away quietly. St. Antienne Le Vieux in Cayenne dates back to the 13th century, and honestly, it survived centuries of conflict until World War II. Now, during the Battle of Seine, a shell tore through the roof, and the once proud church was left gutted by fire and bomb damage. Now, instead of, rebuilding it, the city decided to actually leave the church abandoned as a war relic. But locals say something else stayed behind. Passersby have reported, hearing what sounds like chanting coming from inside, even though the church literally has no roof. Others have claimed to see a single light glowing in, kind of the dark of the night, despite there being no electricity in the ruin at all. Now, during restoration surveys, workers actually refused to go into the basement after hearing footsteps following them in the dark. So today, tourists stay, or they say standing inside the broken, nave of the church feels like being watched from above, almost as if the souls taken during the battle, maybe they never really left the sanctuary where they sought refuge. So if you ever go, let me know what you hear. Borg Vanette Church in Sweden. This one has a pastor that never left, reportedly. Now, the Borg Vanette Church in northern Sweden is so haunted, it was actually converted into a hotel for ghost hunters. Built in 1876, the rectory was home to many pastors who all reported violent poltergeist activity, and one claimed he was even thrown from his chair by invisible invisible hands. Visitors who go here hear crying babies, doors slam on their own, and chairs that are rocking by themselves. Now, a photo from 1981 reportedly shows a woman in 19th century clothing floating in a hallway. Now, if you stay the night, you're actually given a certificate, but most don't actually make it until dawn. So one woman locked herself in the bathroom for hours, saying something was trying to crawl into her body. So you literally get a certificate if you make it. It's kind of like when a burger joint gives you a prize if you finish their like 20-pound burger in 30 minutes. Honestly, I love a good challenge. This one seems worth it to try. I mean, I'm not gonna go, but you go and come back and tell me if you made it. We'll be waiting. Stoll Church in Kansas, USA, which is also known as the Devil's Gateway. Now, the Stoll Cemetery and church are so feared, some locals won't actually say its name out loud. Legend says a hidden staircase beneath the church ruins leads directly to hell, and that the devil himself rises there twice a year, once on Halloween and once on the spring equinox. Now, the church was mysteriously torn down in the 90s at some point, but stories persist. Visitors have seen hooded figures appear behind gravestones and then just vanish. Electronics fail instantly, and one woman claims her unborn baby stopped kicking in her belly during her visit and only resumed movement when they actually left the grounds. So that's creepy. Even Pope John Paul II reportedly diverted his plane around Kansas to actually avoid flying over Stoll. So yeah, this one is a no for me. I'm good. Notre Dame Deagard in Marseille, France. Now, this is the Church of Unanswered Prayers. Known as the protector of sailors, this basilica in Marseille has a dark undercurrent. During storms, prayers are basically offered here to keep boats safe, but locals say if your prayer is rejected, you'll know instantly. Several fishermen have gone missing at sea after visiting the church and reportedly mocking its sacredness. Now, inside, people have heard whispers in Italian or Latin despite no one being nearby. A journalist caught a photo of what looks like a black shadow with horns looming in the upper gallery. Some visitors describe being overcome with grief and dread despite, entering feeling completely normal. Locals say the church knows who you are and what you've done. I don't need my dirty laundry aired out, so I'm gonna pass on this one. Poveglia Island Church in Italy. Now, this is the island of no return, as you know. Now, off the coast of Venice lies Poveglia Island, once a quarantine zone for plague victims and later home to an asylum. The island has a crumbling church where the bell tower still rings, even though the bell was removed years ago. Legend says a doctor who basically tormented patients threw himself from the tower after claiming he was being dragged to hell by ghosts. His body was never recovered. No one lives there now. Locals say if you try to set foot on the island, you'll never feel clean again, whatever that means. And some believe the church was never holy to begin with, only built to hide the evil beneath it. St. Mary's Church, located in Clophill, England, and better known as Satan's Ruins. In the sleepy village of Clophill lies a ruined church that has become infamous for ritualistic black masses and grave desecrations. Now, in 1963, vandals broke into St. Mary's Church, exhumed corpses from the graveyard, and arranged human remains in occult symbols. It shocked the nation, and believe it or not, that was just the beginning. Since then, paranormal investigators have documented seeing glowing orbs, shadow figures moving among the tombstones, and cold winds sweeping through on calm nights. One psychic claimed the site radiates pure malevolence. Local legend says a secret underground chamber beneath the altars where initiations into satanic cults took place, and some claim it's actually still used today. The kicker? Phone and camera batteries reportedly drain instantly when you try to record there at night, so if you visit, be sure to pack a portable charger with you. The Church of the Nine Ghosts in the Philippines, known as the Possessed Parish. This one is hidden in the jungle outside Quezon and is a crumbling stone church locals call Simbahan Siam Namulto, which is the Church of Nine Ghosts. It's said to be haunted by 9 priests who were unalive during World War II. The church is now abandoned, yet travelers swear they've seen ghostly robbed men lined up in the pews just silently watching. Creepy, right? One backpacker took photos and later found 9 blurred figures behind her in every single image. Church, and that's despite her being alone. There's even an audio recording where a woman's voice whispers "Bumalik ka," which is Filipino for "come back." Paranormal groups that investigated the scene reported sudden nausea, burns on their skin, and full body apparitions. Now, many refused to return there, so with that in mind, my recommendation is to not go. Old St. George's Church in the Czech Republic. Now, this one is known as the Living Statues. In 1968, the ceiling collapsed mid-service at Old St. George's Church in Lakova. Now, that incident sparked whispers of a curse, and eventually, the building was actually just left to rot. Now, years later, an artist installed dozens of ghostly statues, resembling mourners frozen in prayer, but visitors that go say the statues actually move. Some turn their heads, others disappear entirely, only to reappear the next day in a completely different pose. Tourists report extreme chills, phantom voices reciting Latin prayers, and sensations of being watched from inside the pulpit. One woman who went actually fainted while standing amongst the statues and claimed she saw the face of her deceased mother in one of them. That's just terrifying. Our Lady of the Angels Cathedral, located in Los Angeles, and this one is known as the Screaming Sanctuary. LA's massive Our Lady of the Angels Cathedral was actually built in 2002, so not that long ago, but beneath it lies the site of a 19th century cemetery. Now, during construction, workers uncovered human remains, and ever since, whispers of strange phenomena have followed the church. A priest actually reported that the confessional booths shake violently at night. One security guard actually quit after seeing a woman in a veil walk through a locked glass door, whispering, "You buried me wrong." And during a 2014 midnight mass, a live microphone picked up a scream that none of the people there could actually hear in person. Only those listening online heard it. Audio engineers couldn't explain it either, so it's still a mystery. But the Vatican sent an inquiry the next month, and even still, nada. So visit at your own risk, but report back if you do and let me know how that goes.
What better place to start today's list than an old abbey? Specifically, Rush Abbey is a now-ruined abbey in the civil parish of Maltby, Rotherham, South Yorkshire, England. If I mispronounced any of that, I apologize, I tried. It is in the valley of Maltby Beck and is administered by English Heritage. It's also listed in the National Register of Historic Parks and Gardens. The abbey was founded in 1147 when the stone buildings were raised on the north side of the beck. The co-founders of Rush were Richard de Buzzley, likely the great-nephew of the first Roger de Buzzley, the Norman magnate builder of Tickhill Castle, and Richard Fitzgerald. When the monks first arrived in South Yorkshire from Newminster Abbey in Northumberland, they chose the most suitable site of the stream that runs through the valley to build their new Cistercian monastery. 25 years later, at the end of the century, the Norman Gothic Great Church, dedicated to the Virgin Mary, had been finished, as well as most of the other buildings. The control of the abbeys was vested in the de Vesci family, lords of Rotherham, who in turn subfeuded the land to Richard Fitzgerald, Lord of Wickersley. From the start, the Abbey of Rush, built for the so-called white monks, as the Cistercians were known, had an almost otherworldly air. It was, after all, built at the northern end of an area once owned by Sherwood Forest, and it was said that Robin Hood went to mass here. At its height, it supported a community of around 175 men, of whom around 60 were choir monks, and the remainder being lay brothers. A Cistercian innovation. Eventually, on the death of the co-founder Fitzgerald, control of the abbey passed to his son Roger, now de Wickersley, and then eventually to a granddaughter, Constantia, who married William de Levitt, a family of Norman origin who were the lords of the nearby village of Houghton Levitt. The abbey continued in the Levitt family until 1377, when John Levitt sold his rights in the abbey to the London merchant Richard Barry. By the time of the dissolution, full control of Rush Abbey was held by Henry Clifford, 2nd Earl of Cumberland, who came in for numerous grants at the dissolution, as he was married to the niece of King Henry VIII. Back in 2021, members of the Conisbrough Paranormal Research Association were adamant that they had spotted a spooky monk at the old abbey. Dean, age 38, from Conisbrough, said that they had been up there taking photos, and the most interesting one was near the first gatehouse. They had found that one of the pictures, which had showed a monk from the chest up, with an orb, like a ball of energy, and the photo showed the outline of his head and a hood. Now, they were still going through the photographs at the time of the articles, because they took up to 1,000, but they were pretty sure it was a monk that would have lived there in the 12th century, when it was still an abbey. So the footage we have today was from the Haunted Finders channel here on YouTube, where a group of investigators had their equipment pick up a lot of spirits still kicking around on the grounds. Time to move over to Ness Church for a little change of pace, and maybe I won't bungle up as many words. Eerily surrounded by gigantic fields, this church is so rural that Google Street View didn't even have documentation of it by 2019. Hell, as of the time of my recording of this, they still don't have a Street View option. There are other rows nearby that have been covered, but nowhere near the church. Like we got here, the church is over here, none of this. If that isn't ominous enough, I don't know what is. Originally organized as the Norwegian Evangelical St. Johan's Congregation of Meeker and surrounding counties in 1861, Ness Church, located in Litchfield, Minnesota, is said to be one of the most haunted locations in the state. This tiny country church is said to be haunted by the spirits of settlers killed during the Sioux uprising of the 1860s. In the nearby town of Acton, a handful of young locals shot and killed 5 settlers, including a woman and her daughter, and all 5 are buried there. The incident sparked a violent conflict that ended with a mass execution of 38 Dakota residents in Mankato, a dark chapter in Minnesota's history. Some folks have reported the lights of the church come on by themselves and apparitions spotted on the premises. Avid ghost hunters frequent the grounds, and back in 2015, there was actually an instance of 4 people breaking into the church and being charged with felony burglary and criminal damage to property. Church officials tried to curb the trespassing and unwanted break-ins by offering guided tours. The video in question today seems to show an apparition caught on camera. You let me know what you think in the comments.
The Cursed Congregation, the First Baptist Church located in Texas. Now, the First Baptist Church in the small town of Sutherland Springs, Texas, is a place of dark legend. According to local lore, the church is haunted by the ghost of a former pastor who is possessed by the devil. A former congregant, Emily Wilson, said, "I was attending a service at the church when I saw the pastor's eyes turn black. It was like he was possessed by something evil. I've never been back to that church again," of course. The First Baptist Church in Texas, particularly the one in Sutherland Springs, became infamous for the 2017 mass attack, leaving first responders and the community haunted by the horror of the event. On November 5th, 2017, a man launched an attack with a fatal weapon at First Baptist Church, fatally hitting 26 people and injuring 20 others. Now, the horrific nature of the carnage left first responders deeply affected, struggling with the trauma and the overwhelming scene. Now, the church, however, is cursed and has a long history dating back to the 19th century, and it's said to be haunted by the ghost of a former pastor who was possessed by the devil. Now, according to the local lore, Pastor Johnson was a very charismatic and influential figure in the church during the early 20th century. However, Johnson's behavior became increasingly erratic and bizarre, and many believe that he was possessed by the devil. One night, Johnson's behavior became so erratic that he was locked in the church's basement. But the next morning, Johnson was found in the pulpit, his eyes black as coal, and his voice changed to a deep, raspy tone. After Johnson's possession, strange occurrences began to happen in the church. Members of the congregation reported hearing noises, ghostly apparitions were seen, and experiencing intense feelings of just fear and dread. Now, many believe that Johnson's possession had cursed the church and that his ghost was still trapped there. The Devil's Domain, the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Now, the cathedral in Spain is one of the most famous pilgrimage sites in the world, but despite its sacred significance, the cathedral has a dark history of paranormal activity. According to reports, the cathedral is haunted by the ghost of a former priest who made a deal with the devil. A visitor named Maria Rodriguez said, "I was visiting the cathedral when I saw a ghostly figure of a priest standing in the sanctuary. It was like he was trying to warn me of something." Now, at night, when the lights of the city are on, a shadow of, a pilgrim is said to appear on the wall of the cathedral. The story goes that a priest who was in love with a nun from the San Pao convent would meet her secretly in a passage under the stairs. One night, the priest asked the nun to run away with him, but she never came. She just didn't show up. The priest returned and waited in anguish for his love, dressed as a pilgrim, and has been waiting every night since. That's heartbreaking. You can find the shadow in the deep corner between the base of the clock tower and the royal door, behind a low fence next to the lighting pillar. There are other versions of this story, of course, including one actually about a criminal who was ordered to make a pilgrimage to Santiago to redeem his sins, but instead became involved in just more crimes. The first myth tells that this shadow is the soul of a criminal who was trapped in the cathedral. It states that a 15th century French nobleman was convicted of unaliving his father out of greed. To redeem his sins, he was ordered to make a pilgrimage to Santiago. However, far from, repenting and purifying himself, during his journey, he became involved in several conflicts that culminated in the assassination of 2 young men. When he arrived in the city exhausted and with no place to rest, he decided to sleep at the doors of the cathedral. Around midnight, though, the ghost of his father appeared to him to forgive him for unaliving him, but told him that he must pay for the demise of the 2 pilgrims. Therefore, he condemned the Frenchman to wait eternally eternally in the Quintana until their souls reached and finished their journey. Starting off with the cursed chapel of the damned. Now, St. Mary's Church in England, St. Mary's Church in the small village of Botsford, England, is a place of dark legend. According to local lore, the church is haunted by the ghost of a young girl who was brutally unalived by a satanic cult in the 17th century. Visitors to the church have reported strange occurrences, including unexplained noises, moving shadows, and an intense feeling of dread. Local resident Sarah Jenkins had said once, "I've been visiting St. Mary's for years, and I've always felt a sense of unease, but one night I saw a ghostly figure of a young girl standing in the pews. It was like nothing I've ever seen before." Now, the Witches of Belvoir is one of the most famous tales of English witchcraft here. In the early 1600s, Joan Flower lived in Botsford with her two daughters, Philippa and Margaret, who worked as servants for the Earl of Rutland at Belvoir Castle. Now, unpopular in their community and distrusted by the rest of the staff at the castle, the sisters were dismissed actually for stealing. Now, according to local legend, the Flower women swore revenge on the Earl and attacked his two sons and heirs to basically the earldom of witchcraft. Now, the story is immortalized in Botsford local church. The Earl's tomb, which lies inside the building, commemorates the unusual passing of the two boys, noting both of them perished in their infancy by wicked practices and sorcery. To this day, St. Mary's Church in Botsford hosts the only known tomb in England to determine witchcraft as the cause of passing. The Devil's Playground, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. Now, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City is one of the largest cathedrals in the world, but despite its grandeur, the cathedral has a very dark history of paranormal activity. According to reports, the cathedral is haunted by the ghost of a former priest who made a pact with the devil. A visitor named Mark Davis said, "I was exploring the cathedral one night when I heard strange noises coming from the crypt. I went down to investigate and saw a figure in a priest's robe standing in the shadows. It was like he was watching me." A guide to the cathedral from 1921 suggested that it might take 700 years for the cathedral to actually be completed, since it was built by employing true Gothic building methods. However, as of right now, it appears that the cathedral will never be completed. A temporary ceiling consisting of tiles is still in place, a century after it was supposed to be demolished so that the cathedral spire could basically rise. Now, St. John the Divine claims to be the largest cathedral in the world, defined as a church that is also the seat of a bishop. Measured by length or internal volume, it is one of the 5 largest church buildings in the entire world. Additionally, it possesses the largest rose window in the United States. The window, which is the 5th largest in the world, was constructed out of 10,000 pieces of stained glass. Just south of the cathedral lies its 11.3-acre close or campus. Visitors can actually stroll through the garden where the different plants and all species mentioned in the Bible. One of the close highlights, is the Peace Fountain, which is designed in 1985 by Greg Wyatt. The fountain was created to mark the 200th anniversary of the Diocese of New York. Now, it depicts the Archangel Michael embracing one of the 9 giraffes after his defeat of Satan. The haunted Hermitage, the Chapel of the Holy Spirit, which is located in France. Now, the Chapel of the Holy Spirit in the French countryside is a small, isolated church that's said to be haunted by the ghost of a former monk. According to local legend, the monk made a pact with the devil in exchange for spiritual enlightenment. A local resident, Pierre Dupont, said, "I've been visiting the chapel for years. I've always felt a sense of peace, but one night I saw a ghostly figure of a monk standing in the hallway. It was like he was trying to communicate with me." Now, the chapel in Rouen, built between 1440 and 1515, is a major example of Gothic, flamboyant Picard art. Now, the Chapel of the Holy Spirit is located in the city center on a hill and is listed in the supplementary inventory of historic monuments. It was previously known as the Chapel of the Lennox Hospital before it actually moved in 1981. According to local legend, Brother Antienne was a devout monk who basically lived in the chapel during the 17th century. Antienne was known for his extreme devotion and his dedication to the church. However, as time went on, Antienne became increasingly disillusioned with the church and its teachings. One night, Antienne made a pact with the devil in exchange for spiritual enlightenment and a lot of power. The devil granted Etienne's wish, but at a terrible cost. Etienne's body began to wither away, and he became consumed by an intense feeling of darkness and despair. Now, several paranormal investigation teams have visited the chapel chapel, and many have reported strange occurrences. Some have captured evidence of ghostly apparitions and unexplained noises. A paranormal investigator named Marie Martin said, "We investigate the chapel and captured some compelling evidence of paranormal activity. We believe that Antienne's ghost is still trapped in the chapel and that his pact with the devil has cursed the place."
So technically this next place isn't a church, but it's a religious building, and that counts in my book. Time to check out the old Ursuline convent in New Orleans. Which is a classic place for all things weird and ooky spooky. The Ursulines have been in Louisiana since the early 1700s and have inhabited a series of buildings up to the present day while working with schools, charities, and orphanages. Apparently back in the 1720s, the French government sent young ladies to their settlements in America as prospective wives for the settlers there. It makes sense. The mademoiselles arrived with their belongings in chests or casquettes and took up residence with the nuns until they could find husbands. According to legend though, they weren't carrying the usual possessions one would find in the luggage of a group of girls at the time. No dresses, books, shoes, money, iPods, no hair ribbons, no brushes. No, these young ladies were carrying vampires. Yeah, vampires in their luggage. Good thing this was in the 1700s because there's no way the TSA would let vampires get through security anymore. They're so strict about what you can bring on planes these days. No liquids in containers greater than 3 ounces, no sharp objects, no aerosol cans, and no undead monsters. Ugh. And here I was hoping to bring a vampire back when I go to the States in a couple of months. Anyways, the legend suggests that the girls were permanently locked in the 3rd floor attic of the old convent with their unusual carry-ons. And to this day, the superstitious locals believe that the vampires sneak out of the convent to feed at night. Although how they sneak out of a building they were locked in is beyond me. Hey look, since the young women were trapped in the convent along with the monsters, I hope that the vampires were at least gentlemen enough to romance the young ladies with sparkly romps through the forest while calling them spider monkeys, or at the very least, the women are keeping them away from the vervain. And if you got either of those references, or both of them, I love you. Alrighty everybody, we're gonna end today with a personal favorite, the Abbey of the Black Hag. Locally known as St. Catherine's Abbey, or simply as Old Abbey, it's located roughly 2 miles east of the village of Shanagolden, in the townland of Old Abbey. Can you guess where it got its name? One of the earliest recorded nunneries in Ireland, with its first official record being around 1298, this place was built on land donated by John Fitzthomas, and has the typical layout for abbeys of its time, with the dining hall, cells, isolated meditation areas, and other rooms still able to be identified amongst the ruins today. During the 15th century, there was a major battle for supremacy in the area between the Earl Fitzgerald and the prestigious Butler family, of which the earldom of Ormond belonged. It got to such an extent that the local bishop was known to pray for peace between the families at masses. During one of the nightly attacks, Earl Fitzgerald attempted to get his wife to safety, but as he was pulling her onto his horse, an arrow pierced her thigh, shattering the bone and spraying red bodily fluids. As he rode on, the countess appeared to have succumbed to her injury, leading the earl to seek sanctuary at St. Catherine's. The heartbroken man was certain his wife had passed, so he swiftly buried her beneath the altar and continued elsewhere to find safety. As the night went on, the nuns and residents began to hear hair-raising screams and made the decision to rebury the countess in the hopes of bringing her peace. When they dug up the body, they discovered her fingers were broken, her nails had been torn off. The poor woman had been buried alive, with a very slow and tumultuous end of her life. To this day, it is believed the countess has been unable to find peace and continues to scream in anguish, waiting for her husband to save her from a fate truly worse than death. Moving slightly ahead in time, we come to the Black Nun herself. Described as one in the order that wasn't content with being humble, helping others over herself, and the servitude to God, she instead craved power. The hag had her own cell, where she worshipped Satan and performed black magic, becoming a slave to the occult. Now this was the highest form of blasphemy in the church, and the other nuns in the order fled the abbey, while the hag remained in her now House of Darkness. I likey. To complete her rituals, the Black Nun would venture into the local community and perform depraved lewd acts and offer sacrifices, with the bones of young community members later discovered on the grounds. Now fast forward to modern times, where visitors have reported seeing the dark, shadowy figure of a nun wandering, the feeling of being constantly watched, and a disembodied hand reaching towards them. There's been flashlights that can't function in her cell, modern batteries drain too quickly to have any sort of rational explanation, just all over weird. And that brings me to the end of my list, which means it's time for comment section shoutouts. From the top 5 scary ghost sightings that will make you a believer, user MKing846 said that they've seen too many things to be a skeptic. You and me both, buddy. Annalise Bloom6765 also said they're a believer. They've had weird and paranormal, demonic things happen to them years ago. Yeah, no, trust me, I get it. And finally, Willie Gutierrez 2337 mentioned that they stay on the Queen Mary every year while working a reggae fest right across the street from it. And it's normal to see ladies walking towards you from afar and just disappear. They got used to it. Well damn, I guess I need to book a trip. How about we kick things off with a fabulous story about witchcraft and the flower woman over at St. Mary's Church in Botsford. The Witches of Belvoir is one of the most famous tales of English witchcraft. And if you don't know it, don't worry, that's what I'm here for. Welcome to my new favorite thing. Let's picture things together, folks. There's this old Gothic church with a towering spire surrounded by gravestones, and it's called St. Mary's Church. Sounds like the perfect setting for a horror movie, right? So back in the early 1600s, there was this woman named Joan Flower who lived there with her daughters, Philippa and Margaret. They were basically outcasts in their community, and they worked as servants for the Earl of Rutland at Belvoir Castle. But here's the thing, they got fired for stealing, and that's when things took a turn for the worse. Legend has it that the flower women were so ticked off about getting canned that they decided to get revenge on the Earl. And how did they do it? Well, let's look at the times. Witchcraft, of course. Yeah, apparently they put a curse on the Earl's two sons, which were the heirs to his earldom, and well, let's just say it didn't end well for the boys. Fast forward to today, and the story is still giving people the EBGBs. This church is like ground zero for creepy tales. Inside the church, there's this tomb that commemorates the deaths of the two boys, and it says that they were, well, killed by wicked practices and sorcery. Fun little additional fact for y'all, St. Mary's Church is the only place in England where you can find a tomb that officially pins witchcraft as the cause of death. Which, that's a little chilling. No wonder the Pope wants to steer clear of this place. Who wants to mess with that kind of dark energy? So, next time you're in the area, maybe think twice before wandering into this church. Unless, you're into that whole haunted cursed tomb vibe. Which, I am. I don't look like it today, but I promise. Normally my cup of tea. Alright, so we're going to stay in England for this next entry and move over to St. Mary the Virgin in Clophill. Clophill? Clophill? I looked up 5 different pronunciations and they told me 5 different things, so you tell me which one's right, folks. Originally built facing the west sometime around the year 1350, it's believed to have been erected on top of a leper hospital run by monks. I'd like to take a moment to note that it was built in the wrong direction, with churches traditionally facing east, the direction from which the sun rises, which is associated with the location of heaven and the return of the Messiah in Christian religion. Altars inside of these holy buildings would face in the eastbound direction for prayers. Some have claimed that because St. Mary the Virgin faces away from God, it thus opens the doors to hell, and ergo responsible for the tale I'm about to tell. Oh, that was a good rhyme. The building was abandoned in 1848 when the rector at the time made the decision to have a new church built, instead of expanding the previous one, which was much needed due to the rapidly growing congregation. Old St. Mary's, as was dubbed by the locals, was then primarily used as a mortuary chapel, holding bodies before they were buried in the adjacent cemetery. By the 1950s, St. Mary's had become so run down that it could no longer fulfill that use, with just the outdoor walls and tower remaining. In March of 1963, the tomb of an 18th century apothecary's wife was broken into and the bones were arranged ritualistically in the middle of the church. And once again, on Midsummer's Eve of 1969, multiple women's graves were broken into, with bones being removed and rearranged once more. While the specific individuals involved in these acts were never identified, the arrangements found resembled those used in black mass rituals performed by satanic groups at the time. After the first incident in 1963, a rare decision was made to rehallow, or in more simple terms, re-bless the altar, which was left in the building in a failed attempt to protect the building from evil. Later that year, Reverend Harold Colthurst reported stumbling upon a group of men in the building that were in the midst of a mysterious ritual, being quoted as saying that the men were trying to communicate with evil spirits, chanting some sort of mumbo-jumbo. They were definitely in league with the devil. Modern-day visitors to the now landmark have reported seeing a plethora of ghostly figures during daytime, nighttime, faint lights moving about before vanishing mysteriously, along with reports of a chilly and oppressive atmosphere even during warm days. Yeah, I can see why some religious folks might not want to go there. How about we talk about a church that might not be haunted but still has some awfulness? Built in the late 8th century under the regime of the Sailendra dynasty, Borobudur Temple took an army of workers and 60,000 cubic meters of lava rock to construct. Yet, despite its massive size and elaborate rows of Buddha statues, it was mysteriously abandoned during the 14th century and sat in the jungle, undiscovered until 1814. It was finally restored with the helping hand of UNESCO in the 1970s, and its walls have some weird carvings, depicting the tormenting of humans, beheadings, and much more gruesome visuals that throw some light on the violent buried past of the site. I can't go into detail, sadly. Despite efforts to protect the temple, a few stupas were nearly destroyed during an attack in 1985. As the site is quite near to a few active volcanoes, the temple has also received its share of volcanic dust and earthquake events. The efforts for conservation have always been made after similar events have happened though, so they're trying to keep it. In the style of a step pyramid, the temple has 6 square bases, topped with 3 circular layers and a large main stupa. Pilgrims and visitors alike follow a guided path to the top of the complex, which leads them around the monument a number of times before reaching the peak. And along the way, the path is marked by 500 Buddha statues and thousands of reliefs that depict daily life in Buddhist Java. It's not spooky, but you still don't want to go there. In third place, we're taking a closer look at St. Mary the Virgin, located on the outskirts of Clophill, England. Originally built facing the west sometime around the year 1350, it's believed to have been erected on top of a leper hospital run by monks. I'd like to take a moment to note that it was built in the quote-unquote wrong direction, with churches traditionally facing east, the direction from which the sun rises, which is associated with the location of heaven and the return of the Messiah in Christian religion. Altars inside of these holy buildings would face in the eastbound direction for prayers. Some have claimed that because St. Mary the Virgin faces away from God, it thus opens its doors to hell, and ergo responsible for the tale I'm about to tell. The building was abandoned in 1848 when the rector at the time made the decision to have a new church built, instead of expanding the previous one, which was much needed due to the rapidly growing congregation. Old St. Mary's, as was dubbed by the locals, was then primarily used as a mortuary chapel, holding bodies before they were buried in the adjacent cemetery. By the 1950s, St. Mary's had become so run down that it could no longer fulfill that use, with just the outdoor walls and tower remaining. In March 1963, the tomb of an 18th century apothecary's wife was broken into, and the bones were arranged ritualistically in the middle of the church. And once again, on Midsummer's Eve of 1969, multiple women's graves were broken into, with bones being removed and rearranged once more. While the specific individuals involved in these acts were never identified, the arrangements found resembled those used in black mass rituals performed by satanic groups at the time. After the first incident in 1963, a rare decision was made to rehollow, or in more simple terms, re-bless the altar that was left in the building, in a failed attempt to protect the building from evil. Later that year, Reverend Harold Colthurst reported stumbling upon a group of men in the building that were in the midst of a mysterious ritual, being quoted as saying that the men were trying to communicate with evil spirits, chanting some sort of mumbo-jumbo. They were definitely in league with the devil. Modern-day visitors to the now landmark have reported seeing a plethora of ghostly figures during the day and nighttime, faint lights moving about before vanishing mysteriously, along with reports of a chilly and oppressive atmosphere even during warm days. In second place, we're visiting l'Abbey de Mortimer, or Mortimer Abbey. It was originally built in 1134 on land gifted by King Henry I. The stagnant water of the drainage lake, which was dug out by the monks to dry up the marshy land, was called Mortimer, or the Dead Pond, giving the monastery its name. Totally not ominous or anything. The monks constructed what was then one of the largest monasteries in the world on said land. The legend says that after the passing of his only son, King Henry wanted to reform his daughter Matilda and had her locked in a room in the abbey for 5 years. The anger and hate she felt from being sent away and isolated stained and seeped into the walls of the monastery, cursing it for eternity. After her eventual release, she went on to live until 1167, when it said her spirit returned to Mortimer Abbey to haunt the area as the White Lady. She is said to appear on nights close to a full moon, moaning as she drifts through the now ruins of the monastery. Those that have seen her report that she alternates between wearing black and white gloves. If she appears to you with white gloves on, you're destined for good luck. But if she appears with black, you'll be expected to pass within a year. Alas, Matilda is not the only spirit one must worry about if visiting the abbey. When the monastery was at its peak in the 1500s, a frail and suffering woman was brought to the monks with an illness it was believed that only they could aid. It was revealed that she was possessed by the spirit of a wolf and cursed to become a werewolf for several nights. The monks chained her to a room and conducted multiple exorcisms in an attempt to eradicate the spirit. The monks were able to exorcise the evil wolf spirit or demonic force out of the woman, but it then attached itself to the grounds and walls of the monastery. Several hundred years later, in 1884, a man named Roger Saboureau was hunting in the woods nearby when he was attacked by a large werewolf. He shot it multiple times, killing the creature, but when he returned home at dawn, he found the body of his wife bearing wounds matching those he had given the wolf. People say the spirit of Roger's wife and his own heartbroken spirit still wander the area when the moon is full. The abbey was exorcised by the church in 1921, but still remains haunted to this day. And coming in first place, we have the Abbey of the Black Hag. locally known as Monastergalagduff. Please don't curse me for my pronunciation, St. Catherine's Abbey, or simply as Old Abbey. It's located roughly 2 miles east of the village of Shanagolden, in the townland of Old Abbey. Gee, can you tell where it got its name? One of the earliest recorded nunneries in Ireland, with its first official record being around 1298, it was built on land donated by John Fitzthomas, and has the typical layout for abbeys of its time, with a dining hall, cells, isolated meditation areas, and other rooms still able to be identified amongst the ruins today. During the 15th century, there was a major battle for supremacy in the area between the Earl Fitzgerald and the prestigious Butler family, of which the Earldom of Ormond belonged. It got to such an extent that the local bishop was known to pray for peace between the families at masses. During one of the nightly attacks, Earl Fitzgerald attempted to get his wife to safety, but as he was pulling her onto his horse, an arrow pierced her thigh, shattering the bone and spraying red bodily fluids. As he rode on, the Countess appeared to have succumbed to her injury, leading the Earl to seek sanctuary at St. Catherine's. The heartbroken man was certain his wife had passed, so he swiftly buried her beneath the altar and continued elsewhere to find safety. As the night went on, the nuns and residents began to hear hair-raising screams and made the decision to rebury the Countess in hopes of bringing her peace. When they dug up the body, they discovered her fingers were broken and her nails had been torn off. The poor woman had been buried alive, with a very slow and torturous end of her life. To this day, it is believed that the Countess has been unable to find peace and continues to scream in anguish, waiting for her husband to save her from a fate truly worse than death. Moving slightly ahead in time, we come to the Black Nun herself. Described as one in the order that wasn't content with being humble, helping others over herself, and the servitude to God, she instead craved power. The hag had her own cell, where she worshipped Satan and performed black magic, becoming a slave to the occult. This was the highest form of blasphemy in the church, and the other nuns in the order fled the abbey, while the hag remained in her now house of darkness. To complete her rituals, the Black Nun would venture into the local community and perform depraved, lewd acts and offer sacrifices, with bones of young community members later discovered on the grounds. In modern times, visitors have reported seeing the dark, shadowy figure of a nun wandering, the feeling of being constantly watched, and a disembodied hand reaching towards them. It has been reported that flashlights cannot function in the nun's cell, and modern batteries drain too quickly to have any sort of rational explanation. In fifth, we have the Most Holy Trinity Church in New York, built sometime between 1882 and 1885 on land that previously served as a graveyard until 1853. According to local rumors, not all of the bodies residing there were exhumed from the graveyard, and the spirits of those left behind still inhabit the grounds to this day. The church property covers an entire city block, and it is said that there are false closets leading to bricked-up doorways, tunnels, and random sub-basements throughout the church and convent. There are also mysterious passageways on the upper levels of the church, where legend says only priests are able to enter. The church's rectory was built in 1872 by its second pastor, Monsignor Michael May, who later passed in his room on the second floor. Priests who live in the rectory have used that space for mainly a guest room ever since, as no one has ever been willing to live in it on an ongoing basis. Guests have experienced lights being switched off and on, hearing strange noises, and the sound of a person walking back and forth while trying to sleep. Phantom footsteps have also been heard on the staircases in the building, and dogs who were once kept as pets in the rectory would stare in a trance-like state down the basement stairs, as well as into the dining room when the building got cold. In 1897, a parish bell ringer named George Stell's life was taken in the vestibule of the church. Though there was a suspect in the case, a former parishioner who would later be executed for an unrelated ending of life, no one was ever convicted of the crime. The red fluids of Mr. Stell's, as well as the red handprint of the killer, is believed to still be on the wall in a stairway leading to the bell tower. George's ghost still roams the church and is believed to be the reason why the bells will ring suddenly, vowing not to leave until his death has been solved. Moving on to our fourth place position, we have the Aquia Church of Stafford, Virginia. While the congregation was established in 1711, the physical parish wasn't built until 1751. It was a gorgeous brick building built on a peaceful hilltop with a two-story crucifix floor plan, which otherwise known as a cruciform, which was considered a rather unusual style for colonial churches. Aquia was built to replace two earlier sites of the Overwharton parish, which were constructed around 1680. The inside of the church burned down in 1754 and was not rebuilt until 1757. It was then shut down from the Revolutionary War until the Civil War due to lack of funding, before reopening as a stable, campsite, and hospital for Union forces. It was during this closure that a young blonde woman was traveling the dark country roads, rural Stafford County, when a group of highwaymen accosted her. This time period was full of exasperated uncertainty from the war, and with it a severe lack of resources, food, and money. Men would wait hidden on the side of roads to steal the valuables from people walking or riding by their hiding spots. She ran from the men to the sanctuary of the church, but was only able to hide for a little while before they broke inside and ended her life. Her body was hidden in the tower, and the men were never caught. It wasn't until after the Revolutionary War ended in 1775 and the church was ready to reopen for services that what was left of her was discovered. A skeleton with golden blonde hair that was as intact as if she had been freshly slain. The red fluid that spilled on the floor from her death was impossible to remove. Despite using every trick known to man, the stains remained in the tower for well over 100 years, until during a modern renovation when the redness was covered up by concrete. With the facility still being in use today, members of the church have mentioned hearing footsteps walking around at all hours of the day and will break into a frantic run around the church at night, but no one is there. Noises can be heard in the empty tower, with some saying it sounds like a struggle, others describing a groan, whistle, or even a call for help. Many have also mentioned seeing a transparent woman in the church's windows, on the balcony, or even in the graveyard, dubbing her Blonde Beth after the hair of the skeleton. In the 1900s, brave people would try to stay overnight at the church, but were chased away by what they described as an unfriendly presence. A custodian working in the graveyard saw a ghostly woman's face floating above the graves, while another man saw a woman smiling at him through the balcony windows before she vanished.
Number 3. Monaster Nagayal de Duff. Or Abbey of the Black Hag, if you don't got all that time. Wow, you see that? You see what that church is called in that little chyron below me right now? I'm just supposed to pronounce that with my lips? Okay, it's also called the Abbey of the Black Hag, and that's what we're going with. We're not calling it that other thing. I'm not doing that. Black Abbey of the Hag, only name this church has ever gone by, and it was built in 1298. And it was one of the well-known medieval convents in Old Ireland. The remains of the abbey still stand today in a secluded valley, making it already mysterious and supernatural place just that much more supernatural and overgrown and spooky. I mean, the place is called the Abbey of the Black Hag. You don't name a place that unless it's extremely haunted or if there's like a cool boss fight or something there. Sounds like it's straight out of Dishonored. It's believed that the last abbess, horrible word by the way, in charge of the abbey practiced witchcraft, and in the scary way, okay? She brought death, misfortune to the surrounding areas. Pope Martin V condemned the abbey, not being down for witches at all. The accused witch left to live out in the damp, deserted abbey by herself, which she probably loved because it sounds scary. Over time, her skin blackened, her hair furled, and her soul twisted, leading to the place being renamed the Abbey of the Black Hag. And if you can believe it, there's actually more to this one. The Count and Countess of Desmond once called the abbey home when attempting to flee their attackers, where the Countess was fatally struck by an arrow and buried by her husband. But it wouldn't be the end of the Countess, because sightings of a ghostly figure around the ruins of the abbey were common, meaning someone eventually went to dig up that grave, finding worn out finger bones, meaning she was still alive when she was buried. It's said now that a woman's panicked shrieking can be heard in the early hours around the abbey. Number 2. The Borley Rectory. The Borley Rectory is an old London estate that has the unique distinction of being considered the most haunted building in the United Kingdom. No big deal, or anything. Almost immediately after its construction, stories of hauntings started to creep out. One of the first local legends says that in the 12th century, a priest and a nun had a naughty little affair, and when they were discovered, the nun was bricked up and left to rot in the nearby church. Since then, they say that her spirit roams the rectory. In 1900, 4 daughters of the then estate owner all said that they saw a nun wandering around the estate late at night. They tried to talk to her but got no response back, just a scary ghost stare. The family claimed they'd see this nun around the property, and on one occasion they thought they saw the spectral apparition of a horse-drawn carriage with a headless rider, some real Sleepy Hollow stuff. From there on, there was all these reports of bizarre sounds or strange shadows creeping out the corner of your eye. In 1927, the estate changed hands as the original family owning the estate had all passed on, and a new family, the Smiths, had moved in. Shortly after, they discovered a human skull in the cupboard in a brown bag. which is not a great housewarming gift, to be honest. They reported poltergeist behavior, unexplained footsteps, lights flicking around them, and the same sightings of headless specters. Now, they only lasted 2 years, not being down for any of the hauntings or skulls in cupboards, any of that business. And the next family, the Foysters, didn't have much better luck. They had objects flying around their home, and on one occasion claimed their daughter was attacked by something truly horrible. They moved out as well. And the last owner of the rectory would be Captain Gregson, who accidentally lit the estate ablaze while unpacking, although insurance claims they think the fire was started intentionally, perhaps in a desperate attempt to cast away whatever evil has been trapped in the Borley rectory for so long, or perhaps he unintentionally unleashed it out into the world. Time will tell. At number 1, Mortimer Abbey. Mortimer Abbey is a monastery in the forest of Lyons, France. A real old church built in 1134 on marshland, near the stagnant water of the drainage lake. The monks dug it out to try and dry the marshy land around the Fulbrock stream, which was called the Dead Pond. In French, Mortemont, which is where the name comes from. You can kind of hear it there. Mortimer, you know. Perhaps it's this history of being built on a dead pond is why Mortimer Abbey was doomed to be haunted. Now, the abbey flourished for centuries, but over time started to become claimed by the passage of time, and it fell into decline and disrepair. In the 17th century, there was an attempt to try and rebuild the abbey and recapture its former old glory, but the decline was already pretty present and had set in by that point, and by the time of the French Revolution, only 5 monks still remained in the abbey. Eventually, the abbey would collapse entirely and go private, and in 1863, the abbey would find itself in the hands of a rich Parisian family, the Delarues. Mr. Delarue moved his wife and his sons into the abbey, but soon discovered they weren't the only tenants. While walking the lawns, the young people of the house saw a light from the library. As if by an invisible hand, these hatches unfastened, their handles turned, and the windows and doors all opened. The paintings on the inside of the abbey turned themselves around and steps thundered out into the halls, and nobody moved out immediately after. I would have started looking for new real estate right then and there. But one night the young Delarue, Charles, had his fiancée over to come see the estate that would become her new home in marriage. She was offered the guest room, but found herself terrified during the night when she couldn't sleep because she was too busy being tormented by mysterious sounds and objects around the room that were hurling themselves around, being possessed by something. Having had, quite frankly, enough, like I think any of us might have, the young suitor announced she would never live in this house, called off the entire marriage, and hurried back to Paris tout de suite, where there were plenty of handsome young men asking her hand in marriage who didn't live in old haunted estates, okay? That's the message to take away from this. Get the love you deserve, and the love you deserve is not in a haunted house. Number 5, St. Mary the Virgin Church. Clop Hill, England. I gotta say, that sounds like it's a fake place, like where Sir Topham Hatt lives. Well, not only is it real, but it's home to a bone-chilling haunted church, St. Mary the Virgin Church. Now, St. Mary was built in 1350 outside the main settlement of totally real place Clop Hill. Traditionally, churches are built facing the east. I didn't know that. It's so it can align with the sun rising, which in Christianity is associated with heaven and the Messiah. Churches have their altars facing east, so you pray in that holy direction. Well, St. Mary's just had to be a little different, and this church is facing the west, facing away from God. And it's why some people believe the church is hosted to evil spirits, as facing west means they've shunned God and opened their doors to the devil. Paranormal investigators have strongly suspected the church as being host to satanic rituals. As the church fell into disuse, it became a popular spot for vandals, and if you believe the legends, black magic. In 1963, a local couple saw 2 people wandering around holding a human skull, which definitely I think would cause you to look twice. The people told the couple that they had found the skull in St. Mary's, where it had been jammed into a wall. When the couple went to investigate, they found on the floor a breastbone, pelvis, and leg bones, all laid out in a pattern used for black mass. Pretty spooky. Scattered cockerel feathers and tracings of 2 crosses filled in red were found inside the church as well. And as if that wasn't slightly unnerving enough, they also found that 6 graves of women in particular had been tampered with as well. All signs seem to be pointing towards some dark rituals happening at St. Mary's Church. Common sightings at the St. Mary's Church range from smaller scale things like strange screeching during the night or hearing the bell going off despite being long abandoned, and the more threatening reports seeing tall, dark figures wandering the ruins of the church, perhaps getting themselves ready for another ritual, or perhaps they they've been contacted by a ritual and are arriving. Only thing I know is I won't be checking out the midnight mass there anytime soon. And if you're interested in way more scary stories of all manners, cryptids, conspiracies, churches, hauntings, aliens, we've got a little bit of everything at Top 5 Scary. So click on through, find something to get cozy with, and subscribe, and make sure you hit that bell so you catch all of our videos as they drop. But do all that stuff at the end of this one, okay? Because we got way more haunted churches for you coming right up. Number 4. Our next entry on the list today is going to be the Aquia Episcopal Church. And if you haven't said that, try saying that 10 times fast. I dare you. Located in picturesque Stafford, Virginia. The church has 200 years of history to it, which means it's also got approximately 200 years worth of ghost stories to study. When the church was first built way back when in the 18th century, it was stained by an unfortunate tragedy. You see, the surrounding areas were exhausted by war and the lack of resources, food, and money, and as such, brigands would take to the dark country roads to attack innocents during the night for whatever they had on them. Well, one young woman was hiding from a gang of highwaymen and marauders and sought out the church as a safe haven. Unfortunately, the bandits eventually caught up with her and she met an untimely end. Now, these men were never caught for their crime, and her body was not found for hundreds of years, left there to rot and decompose. And many believe that because of this, her spirit is tied to the church. And there have been several reports of hauntings ever since the discovery of those accursed bones. Visitors mention hearing footsteps frantically scattered around at night. These footsteps break into a run, but if you go searching, you'll never be able to find anyone attached to them. Voices can be heard in the room where she was attacked, some saying it sounds like a call for help or a painful scream of a struggle. Some go so far as to say they saw a transparent apparition of the woman in the church's windows or on the balcony. One story comes to us from a custodian who worked the graveyard shift there in the 1990s, claiming that he saw a ghostly woman's face floating above the graces, and says that he saw her smiling at him through the balcony windows before she vanished. One last one on this church. In the 1990s, to celebrate the bicentennial anniversary, the church sent out an invitation to a group of Civil War reenactors to fight a mock battle on its ground. During the night, one of the reenactors was complaining that there was a red and orange light that was flickering the entire night during the church that prevented him from sleeping. The man explained this to the father of the church, and the father explained back that there was no electricity in the vestry, and that the light must have been the spirit confused by why the Civil War had started up again. Imagine, you're a ghost, you're already out of time, and then you look outside and you see guys from your time? My little ghostly sense of the world would be so thrown off. I would have to buy a new ghost calendar.
Back to Abbeys we go, with Kirkstall Abbey next up on the docket. The picturesque ruins have been drawn and painted by artists such as J.M.W. Turner, Thomas Girton, and John Sell Cotman. Kirkstall Abbey was acquired by the Leeds Corporation as a gift from Colonel North and opened to the public in the late 19th century. The gatehouse became a museum, which is now part of the Leeds Museums and Galleries group. The English houses, of which there are remains at Fountains, Rievaulx, Kirkstall, Tintern, and Netley, were mainly arranged after the same plan, with slight local variations. Situated just outside of Leeds, Kirkstall Abbey still stands to its full height and for centuries offered a peaceful existence for the monks who lived and worked there. However, daily life could be harsh, and like any community, it was not immune to intrigue and mystery as religion developed. With over 800 years of history, this abbey attracts many visitors and is considered one of the oldest attractions in the region. During the dissolution of the monasteries under King Henry VIII, this abbey was emptied and its remains were left behind. Now, after that dissolution, sightings of ghosts have become common, and by the 19th century there were reports of ghostly apparitions in the nave of the church. One witness claimed to have seen a funeral procession of somber men, clad in white, proceeding slowly. Now, the abbey is also famous for its repeated haunting manifestation of a former abbot that walks around the building that has now been converted to the Abbey House Museum, although you're more likely to hear him moving around than you are to see him. Some also believe that there is a mad monk who haunts the abbey after his brother was killed by highwaymen on his way back from the Fountains Abbey, which is another abbey in Yorkshire. Mad with guilt and despair, he began carving his brother's initials into the abbey grounds that can apparently still be seen in small bench nooks around the ruins even now, and he continues to walk around the abbey to this day. The grounds are also home to a young female entity called Mary, who witnessed her lover ending the life of another and then turned him in. She has often been seen with the ghost of a dog, but we're not sure if they're connected or not. The footage we have today, by the way, is another stellar example of spirit communication tech at work. I've used some of those things before myself. They are quite reliable and pretty freaky. Okie dokie, internet sleuths, I need your help with this next video. In my opinion, it's an internet legend that's been kicking around since 2007. Heck, I remember the first time I watched it on my little iPod under my High School Musical comforter, terrified. I was up too late, and when my brain saw something like this, well, I was already in the dark. Well, let's just say it set my mind racing. I'm the kind kind of gal who needs to have all the doors closed in a room or I cannot sleep. It is not happening. Heck, I was recently in an area that was affected by a weird power outage, and I think I lasted like an hour in the darkness with my 20 candles before I went to a home with power because I couldn't stand being alone with my thoughts, and yeah, nope. Not it. Sorry, back to the video I go. This one depicts David Holley and Jake Garrison, who alleged that they stumbled upon an abandoned chapel in the woods and decided to do some sleuthing. As one does. How very Scooby-Doo of you. And the duo encountered a spirit playing the piano while they did. And very well, if I say so myself. Fun fact about me, folks, I took Royal Conservatory piano testing when I was younger, so I have an idea of what I'm talking about. I used to have to sight read. Other than that, I have no idea where the funeral channel guys are located, so let me know in the comments what you know. Okie dokie, everybody. We're gonna end today with an exorcism filmed through a peephole. So it's no secret that exorcisms are still a practice done today, but the Catholic Church really likes pretending that they don't because of the negativity and stigma around it. Technically speaking, the Catholic Church authorizes the use of exorcism for those who are believed to be the victims of demonic possession. Specifically, in Roman Catholicism, exorcism is a sacramental but not a sacrament, unlike baptism, confirmation, or confession. So unlike a sacrament, exorcism's efficiency depends on two elements: authorization from valid and legitimate church authorities, and the faith of the exorcist. The church will ask publicly, and in a position of authority, in the name of Jesus Christ, that a person or object be protected against the power of the evil one and withdrawn from his dominion. Now, the rite of exorcism was revised in January of 1999 and assumes that possessed persons retain their free will, though the demon may hold control over their physical body and involves prayers, blessings, and invocations with the use of the document of exorcisms and certain supplications. Typically, the individual will be restrained, and the priest will perform a ritual of prayers to remove the evil spirits. Solemn exorcisms, according to the canon law of the church, can be exercised only by an ordained priest or higher, with the express permission of the local bishop, and only after a careful medical examination to exclude the possibility of mental illness. The Catholic Church has between 500 to 600 official exorcists, by the way, with the vast majority operating in Latin America and Eastern Europe. Now that we're all clear on the formal definition of exorcisms, let's dive into this lovely video from 2014. The ritual was captured on camera by a man who heard the shrieks of a woman inside the sanctuary and filmed it through a peephole. The incident occurred at the Assumption of the Virgin Mary Church in Fresneuve nad Digy in February of 2014, and the church priest, Marek Dunda, confirmed the video is real, but mentioned that if something's filmed through a keyhole, he's not going to say anything about it, which that's a dodging the question kind of answer if I've ever heard one. And trust me, I'm the daughter of a politician. He told the newspaper he carries a mandate from his bishop to perform exorcisms. He said that the group was asking God to protect and to liberate the person that was suffering, which included using a Latin prayer asking for help, and of course it helps. Look, I'm no expert on exorcism rituals, yet. But if you have to state that of course something helps, in my personal opinion, I'm a little skeptical. It's kind of hard to tell what's happening in the video, but it appears that at least two people surround the woman, who can be heard screaming in agony with momentary pauses in between for the duration of the just under 2-minute long video. Daniel Chokta, who shot the video after hearing the screams, warns people in the description to watch the chilling footage while wearing headphones. When asked about the condition of the woman in the video, the priest said any details about her or her state were private. And while I'm glad the church is respecting her privacy, I just hope the poor woman has been cured and healed. As much as I joke about it and I make light of it, demonic possession is no pleasant or laughing matter.